The Type 56 is a Chinese 7.62 x 39 mm assault rifle. It is a variant of the Soviet-designed AK-47 and AKM assault rifles. Production started in 1956 at State Factory 66, and since then it has been produced by Norinco, who continue to produce the rifle primarily for export. Service history. During the Cold War period, the Type 56 was exported to many countries and guerrilla forces throughout the world. Many of these rifles found their way to battlefields in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East and were used alongside other Kalashnikov pattern weapons from both the Soviet Union as well as the Warsaw Pact nations of Eastern Europe. Chinese support for the Democratic Republic of Vietnam before the mid-1960s meant that the Type 56 was frequently encountered by American soldiers in the hands of either Viet Cong guerrillas or PAVN soldiers during the Vietnam War. The Type 56 was discovered in enemy hands far more often than standard Russian-made AK-47s or AKMs. When relations between China and the North Vietnam crumbled in the 1970s and the Sino-Vietnamese War began, the Vietnamese government still had large numbers of Type 56 rifles in its arsenals, while the People's Liberation Army still used the Type 56 as its standard weapon. Thus, Chinese and Vietnamese forces fought each other using the same Type 56 rifles. The Type 56 was used extensively by Iranian forces during the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, with Iran purchasing large quantities of weapons from China for their armed forces. During the war, Iraq also purchased a small quantity, despite them being a major recipient of Soviet weapons and assistance during the war. This was done in conjunction with their purchasing of large number of AKMs from the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Consequently, the Iran-Iraq War became another conflict in which both sides used the Type 56. Since the end of the Cold War, the Type 56 has been used in many conflicts by various military forces. During the Croatian War of Independence and the Yugoslav Wars, it was used by the armed forces of Croatia. During the late 1990s, the Kosovo Liberation Army in Kosovo were also major users of the Type 56, with the vast majority of the weapons originating from People's Socialist Republic of Albania, which received Chinese support during much of the Cold War. In the United Kingdom and the United States, the Type 56 and its derivatives are frequently used in the filming of movies and television shows, standing in for Russian-made AK-47s due to the rarity of original AK-47s, with some even being visually modified to resemble other AK series rifles. Versions of this weapon that have the full auto-firing ability deleted, referred to as sporter rifles, are also available for civilian ownership in most parts of the United States. In the mid-1980s, Sri Lanka started to replace their L1A1 self-loading rifles, SLR, and HKG3S with the Type 56. Currently, they use the fixed stock, under-folding stock, and side-folding stock variants. The Type 81, Type 95, and Type 03 replaced Type 56 in PLA frontline service, but the Type 56 remains in use with reserve and militia service. Type 50 SIXs are still in production by Norinco for export customers. During the Soviet War in Afghanistan in the 1980s, many Chinese Type 56 rifles were supplied to Afghan Mujahideen guerrillas to fight Soviet forces by China, Pakistan, and the US, who obtained them from third-party arms dealers. Use of the Type 56 in Afghanistan also continued well into the 1990s and the early 21st century as the standard rifle of the Taliban. When Taliban forces seized control of Kabul in 1996, a majority of the Chinese small arms used by the Taliban were provided by Pakistan. Since the overthrow of the Taliban by U.S.-led coalition forces in late 2001, the Type 56 assault rifle has been utilized by the Afghan National Army, with many rifles serving alongside other AK-47 and AKM variant rifles. The Type 56 has been seen regularly in the hands of militants from the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas in the Palestinian territories. The Type 56 has been used by the Janjaweed in the Darfur region of Sudan, with pictures and news footage showing members of the Janjaweed carrying Type 56 rifles, most of them provided by the Sudanese government. In 1987, Michael Ryan used a legally owned Type 56 rifle, and 2 other firearms, in the Hungerford massacre in the United Kingdom, in which he shot 32 people, 17 of whom died. The attack led to the passage of Firearms Amendment, Act 1988, which bans ownership of semi-automatic center-fire rifles and restricts the use of shotguns. In the United States, a Type 56 rifle, purchased in Oregon under a false name, was used in the 1989 Stockton schoolyard shooting in which Patrick Purdy fired over 100 rounds to shoot 1 teacher and 34 children, killing 5. The shooting led to the passage of California's Roberti Roos Assault Weapons Control Act of 1989. A Type 56, along with a Type 56S1, were used by Larry Phillips, Jr. and Emil Mtsrianda during the 1997 North Hollywood shootout. In the Syrian civil war of 2011 to the present, the Type 56 assault rifles are seen being used by the Free Syrian Army. Compared to AK-47 and AKM. Originally, the Type 56 was a direct copy of the AK-47, and featured a milled receiver, but starting in the mid-1960s, the guns were manufactured with stamped receivers much like the Soviet AKM. Visually, most versions of the Type 56 are distinguished from the AK-47 and AKM by the fully enclosed hooded front sight. All other AK pattern rifles, including those made in Russia, have a partially open front sight. Many versions also feature a folding bayonet attached to the barrel just aft of the muzzle. There are 3 different types of bayonets made for Type 56 rifles. The first Type 50 SIXS were near identical copies of the Soviet-milled AK-47. It is speculated that the Chinese had to reverse engineer a copy of the AKM with the stamped receiver as they were not given a license to produce the AKM and RPK by the Soviets because of failing relations after the Sino-Soviet split. The Type 56 has a 1.5 mm stamped receiver, like the RPK, although it lacks the reinforced trunnion of the RPK, versus the 1 mm stamping of the AKM. The barrel on the Type 56 is similar to the AK-47 and heavier than that of the AKM. The front sights are fully enclosed, compared to the AKM and AK-47 which are partially opened. Has the double hook disconnector of the AK-47 rather than the single hook disconnector of the AKM. Has a smooth dust cover like the AK-47 and unlike the ribbed dust cover of the AKM. May have a folding spike bayonet, nicknamed the pig sticker, as opposed to the detachable knife bayonets of the AK-47 and AKM. There are 3 different types of spike bayonets made for Type 56 rifles. Type 56 assault rifles are the only AK pattern assault rifles that use spike bayonets. Military-issued versions of the Type 56 lack the threaded muzzle found on the AK-47 and AKM. This means they cannot use an AKM compensator or blank firing device. Commercial versions of the Type 56 may or may not have a threaded muzzle. Has a blued finish like the AK-47 and unlike the AKM, which has a black oxide finish or a parkerized finish. Has in the white bolt carrier, while the AKM bolt carrier is blued. Like the AK-47, sights will only adjust to 800 meters, whereas AKM sights adjust to 1000 meters. Nearly all Type 50 SIXS lack the side mount plate that was featured on many variations of the AK-47 and AKM. Lacks the hammer release delay device of the AKM. The lack of hammer retarder is perhaps due to a preference of a slightly higher rate of fire, and simplicity. And did not have anything to do with thickness of the receiver, as the RPK included the hammer retarder also. The gas relief ports are located on the gas tube like the AK-47, unlike the AKM which had the gas relief ports relocated forward to the gas block. The fixed stock of a Type 56 has a less inline stock like the AK-47, opposed to the AKM which has a straighter stock. Variants. Type 56 basic variant introduced in 1956. A copy of the AK-47 with a fixed wooden stock and permanently attached spike bayonet. In the mid-1960s production switched from machine to stamped receivers, mimicking the improved, and cheaper, Russian AKM, while the permanently attached bayonet became optional. Still used by Chinese reserve and militia units. Type 56I copy of the axe, with an underfolding steel shoulder stock and the bayonet removed to make the weapon easier to carry. As with the original Type 56, milled receivers were replaced by stamped receivers in the mid-1960s, making the Type 56-1 an equivalent to the Russian AKMS. Type 56-2 improved variant and copy of AKM. Introduced in 1980, with the side-folding stock. Mainly manufactured for export and rare in China. Type 56-4 copy of Type 56-1 in 5.56 x 45 mm NATO with underfolding stock. 1/12 barrel rifling twist to stabilize the M193 NATO cartridge. Folding spike bayonet. Chrome-plated bore and chamber, selective fire. Barrel is extended past the front sight 3/3/4 inches. Threaded flush muzzle cap. English fire control markings S and F for export version, no marking on full auto fire control position. Rear sight calibrated to 800 meters. Stamped receiver. Serial number is marked on bolt carrier, bolt, receiver cover, receiver. Type 56C, QBZ56C, short barrel version, introduced in 1991 for the domestic and export market. The QBZ56C, as it is officially designated in China, is a carbine variant of the Type 56-2 and supplied in limited quantities to some PLA units. The Chinese Navy is now the most prominent user. Development began in 1988, after it was discovered that the Type 81 assault rifle was too difficult to shorten. In order to further reduce weight, the bayonet lug was removed. The QBZ56C is often carried with a 20-round box magazine, although it is capable of accepting a standard Type 56 30-round magazine. Type 50 SIXS or Type 56 Sporter, also known as the Mach 90, model of the AK, 1990 civilian version with only semi-automatic mode. NHM 91 Sporterized RPK-style version with a stamped receiver and 20 heavy barrel. Type 84 is a civilian version of the Type 56 rifle chambered for the 5.56 x 45 mm NATO round. KL 7.62 an unlicensed, reverse-engineered Iranian copy of the Type 56. The original version of the KL 7.62 was indistinguishable from the Type 56, but in recent years DIO appears to have made some improvements to the Type 56 design, adding a plastic stock and handguards, rather than wood, and a ribbed receiver cover, featured on most AKM variants, but missing from the Type 56, as well as Picatinny rails on newer versions. Maz Sudanese licensed copy of the Type 56 made by Military Industry Corporation. Other Type 56 weapons. The Type 56 designation was also used for Chinese versions of the SKS and of the RPD, known as the Type 56 carbine and Type 56 light machine gun respectively. However, unlike the popular Type 56 rifle, all Type 56 carbines have been removed from military service, except a few used for ceremonial purposes and by local Chinese militia. The Type 56 light machine gun is still used by the Cambodian Army and Sri Lankan Army. AIM 74 Ka. The AIM 74 Ka appears to be an Iranian copy using locally manufactured parts. Manufactured of pressed mild steel and chambered for 7.62 x 39 mm, it is a curious mix of design features. It has the gas block and sights of a Type 56, but the left folding stock of an AK-102. The flash hider is of a more Western design that appears to be inspired by the Heckler & Koch G36 open cage flash hider, but with large threading that suggests an intended muzzle attachment such as a grenade launcher or possibly a suppressor. No provision is made for a bayonet. Furniture is of a modern polymer material, but the foregrip is not equipped with heat shields internally, which would almost certainly cause issues in sustained fire. Magazines are identical to those used on a Type 56. Fit and finish is particularly bad, even for Iranian weapons, and it is thought that production was very limited due to scarcity. Examples have been recovered in Somalia, Iraq, and Yemen, all in poor condition. Markings on the right side of the weapon are conventional and in Western characters. On the left side of the weapon appears AIM 74 Ka in both Latin and Persian script, with no other markings. No manufacturer stamp appears anywhere on the weapon. Users: Afghanistan, Albania, Armenia, Bangladesh, Benin, Bolivia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Burkina Faso, Burundi, Cambodia, Central African Republic, Chad, China, Croatia, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Djibouti, East Timor, Ecuador, Estonia, Ethiopia, Finland, Gabon, Guyana, India, Iran, Iraq, Iraqi Kurdistan, Ivory Coast, Kenya, Kosovo, Laos, Lesotho, Liberia, Libya, Madagascar, Mali, Malta, Mexico, Morocco, Myanmar, Nepal, Nicaragua, Niger, Nigeria, North Korea, Pakistan, Palestine, Republic of the Congo, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Somalia, South Sudan, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Syria, Tajikistan, Tanzania, Thailand, the Gambia, Togo, Uganda, United States, Vietnam, Yemen, Zimbabwe, Zambia used by the Zambia National Service, Indonesia used for reserve and only in small amounts.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.